Crystal glasses clinked against fine china as my sister, Sabrina Thompson, hosted yet another one of her elite family dinners. I sat quietly at the far end of the table, watching my brother-in-law Nathan, the self-proclaimed business genius, hold court with his usual audience of admirers. 42, he wore his CEO status like a crown, each word dripping with the kind of confidence that only comes from never having faced real failure. "And that's how I closed the Anders merger," he concluded, basking in the appreciative murmurs from the gathered family. "Biggest deal of the quarter. Some people just understand business at a different level." His eyes flicked to me, lips curling into what Sabrina probably thought was a charming smile. I took another sip of wine, already knowing what was coming. These monthly family dinners had become Nathan's favorite stage for his particular brand of subtle cruelty. "Speaking of business," he turned fully toward me. "Elena, how's that little, what do you call it, consulting thing of yours?" "It's going well," I replied evenly, noting how Sabrina straightened in her chair, eager for the show to begin. 38, I'd learned the best defense against Nathan's barbs was calm dignity. "Still working from home, right?" he chuckled, swirling his expensive bourbon. "You know, when Sabrina told me her sister was in business too, I expected something more professional. How can anyone take you seriously without even a proper office?" My mother shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Dad suddenly found his roasted vegetables fascinating. They'd long ago chosen their side in the family dynamic, and it wasn't mine. "My clients seem satisfied," I said, calmly spearing a piece of perfectly cooked salmon. Nathan had insisted on catering from the city's most expensive restaurant, another chance to flaunt his wealth. "Clients?" Nathan barked out a laugh. "Is that what we're calling local coffee shops and boutiques now? You know, Elena, if you ever want real business advice." "Actually," a deep voice cut through the dining room, "her client list is quite impressive." All heads turned toward Richard Anderson. Yes, the Anderson of the merger Nathan had just been bragging about. He'd been quietly observing from the other end of the table, where Nathan had seated him as the guest of honor. "In fact," Anderson continued, setting down his fork, "my daughter's company has been trying to get on her waiting list for months. Elena's firm is rather selective about who they take on." The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear Sabrina's sharp intake of breath, see Nathan's face transition from smug confidence to visible confusion. "Your daughter's company?" Nathan managed, his voice suddenly less certain. "Megan Anderson, CEO of Horizon Tech," Richard smiled warmly in my direction. "Elena's firm handled the Matthews Group acquisition last year. Brilliant strategy, by the way." When Megan told me who was behind it, I could hardly believe someone so young had orchestrated such a complex deal. But then again, real talent doesn't need corner offices to prove itself, does it? I watched the color drain from Nathan's face as realization dawned. The Matthews acquisition had been the talk of the business world, a $400 million deal that transformed the tech landscape. And I had orchestrated it, from my home office. The same one he'd mocked minutes earlier. I had no idea," Nathan stammered, his earlier bravado evaporating. "Obviously," I replied softly, allowing myself a small smile. "More wine, anyone?" Sabrina's hand shook as she gripped her glass, her perfect hostess composure cracking. My mother's mouth had fallen slightly open. My father was now staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. "Elena," Nathan started again, his tone shifting to something almost ingratiating. "Why didn't you ever mention that? Why didn't you ever mention that I handle major corporate acquisitions? That my little consulting thing advises Fortune 500 companies?" I set down my wine glass carefully. "You never asked, Nathan. You were too busy telling everyone how successful you are." Richard Anderson chuckled. "And speaking of success, Elena, I hope you'll consider taking Horizon Tech on as a client. Megan's been quite persistent about wanting to work with you." "Of course." Nathan jumped in. "Anything for family. I'm sure Elena would be happy to." "I'm afraid my schedule is quite full," I interrupted smoothly. "But Mr. Anderson, please tell Megan to have her team send over the proposal. I'll review it personally." Nathan's face flushed red. The Anderson merger he had been bragging about, his so-called biggest deal of the quarter, was worth less than half of what I handled for Matthews. And now, his direct line to Richard Anderson was watching me with clear respect, barely acknowledging Nathan's presence. Elena. Sabrina finally found her voice, though it trembled slightly. Why didn't you tell us? All these years. Tell you what, Sabrina? I asked. That while you and Nathan were mocking my little business, I was building one of the most respected consulting firms in the industry. That the home office you love to ridicule has closed deals worth billions? I dabbed my lips with the linen napkin. Would you have believed me? Or would you have just found new ways to diminish my success? Truth hung heavy in the air. They wouldn't have believed me. They had been too invested in their narrative, of Nathan as the family's business genius, and me as the struggling younger sister who couldn't quite measure up. But your clothes... Sabrina gestured weakly at my simple black dress. Your car. You live in that small house. Because I don't need to prove anything to anyone, I replied calmly. Success speaks for itself. It doesn't need designer labels or luxury cars to be real. Richard Anderson nodded approvingly. That's precisely why your reputation in the industry is so sterling, Elena. No flash. Just substance. The exact opposite of... His eyes flickered to Nathan, certain other approaches. Nathan's hand tightened around his bourbon glass. His carefully crafted image of business brilliance was crumbling, and with it, his standing in the family. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. Mr. Anderson, I turned to Richard, ignoring Nathan's subtle attempts to catch my eye. I'd love to hear more about Horizon Tech's expansion plans. Perhaps over dinner next week? I know a wonderful little place, Nathan interjected desperately. The new French restaurant on 5th, I'm a member there. I'm actually... I smiled, one of the small side investors. Nothing like running a major corporation, of course, but it turns a nice profit. The restaurant Nathan had been trying to get a membership to for months. The one he'd bragged about finally getting into. He'd never known that every time he dined there, he'd been in my establishment. Sabrina's wine glass slipped from her fingers, staining the pristine white tablecloth red. But for once, she didn't rush to clean it up. She was too busy staring at me, really seeing me, for the first time in years. The thing about success, I continued, standing from the table, is that it doesn't need an audience to be real. I looked around at the stunned faces. While you were all focused on Nathan's latest promotion or Sabrina's country club memberships, I was building something lasting. Something real. I reached for my simple leather handbag, not designer but handmade by an artisan whose business I had helped start. Thank you for dinner, Sabrina. Mr. Anderson, I'll have my office contact you about that dinner next week. As I walked toward the door, I heard Nathan's strained voice behind me. Elena, wait. Perhaps we should discuss. Discuss what? I turned back briefly. How you spent years mocking my business. How you treated me like a failure because I didn't brag about my success. Or maybe how you're suddenly interested in my little consulting thing now that you know who my clients are. The silence was deafening. Sabrina had sunk back in her chair, her perfect dinner party in ruins. Our parents were looking anywhere but at me. And Nathan? Nathan looked like a man watching his carefully constructed world fall apart. Send me the dinner bill, Sabrina, I called over my shoulder as I reached the door. I know how Nathan hates to spend money on family charity cases. The door closed behind me with a satisfying click, leaving them to digest, not just their expensive catered meal, but the realization that they'd spent years underestimating exactly the wrong person. And this was just the beginning. Because what they didn't know, what Nathan was about to find out, was that his company's upcoming merger, the one he'd been counting on to secure his position as CEO, was about to face an unexpected complication. One that had everything to do with the sister-in-law he'd dismissed for so long. The morning after the dinner party, my phone exploded with notifications. Texts from Sabrina. Voicemails from Nathan. Even emails from my parents. All suddenly desperate to clear up any misunderstandings. I smiled, remembering the look on Nathan's face when Richard Anderson revealed who I really was. But I wasn't interested in their belated attempts at reconciliation. I had a merger to stop. You see, what Nathan didn't know, what he'd been too arrogant to investigate, was that his company's merger wasn't just another deal. It was a carefully orchestrated plan. One I'd been developing for months. Elena, My assistant's voice came through the intercom of my home office. Yes, the same one Nathan loved to mock. Mr. Anderson is on line 1. I picked up the phone, settling into my ergonomic chair. My little home office might not have impressed Nathan, but its technology rivaled any corporate headquarters. Richard, I greeted. Good morning. Claire, he said warmly, dinner last night was enlightening. Your brother-in-law seems to be having quite the morning. He's been trying to reach me since dawn. I could imagine. Nathan's entire career hinged on this merger. The one he'd been bragging about at every family gathering for the past 6 months. Has he figured it out yet? I asked, pulling up the merger documents on my triple monitor setup. Not yet, Richard chuckled. Though he might want to take a closer look at who's been quietly buying shares in his company over the last 6 months. Ah yes, the investment firm that had been accumulating a significant stake in Nathan's company. The one operating through a series of shell corporations. The one that, through a complex web of entities, belonged to me. Another call flashed on my phone screen. Sabrina again. I declined it. Your sister seems persistent, Richard observed. They all are, now that they know. I signed off on another document, watching as my ownership percentage ticked up another fraction. Amazing how success suddenly changes people's perspective. The next few days were a symphony of panic from Nathan's side. He finally began digging into the merger details, probably hoping to impress me with his business acumen. Instead, he discovered something terrifying. His company was being systematically purchased by an unknown entity. You have to help me, he said, cornering me outside my favorite coffee shop, not coincidentally one of my earliest consulting clients. Claire, whatever bad blood there is between us, this is my career we're talking about. I took a sip of my artisanal latte. Funny, I replied. I thought it was just a little coffee shop last month, when you mocked me for helping them expand. I was wrong, okay? He said, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up in a way Sabrina would have hated. I was arrogant. And stupid. But please, if this merger falls through, then what, Nathan? You'll have to work your way up like everyone else? Start something from scratch? Build a business without riding on your family name? His face paled. We both knew the truth. Nathan had never built anything himself. His CEO position had come through connections, not competence. The same connections he used to mock me at every opportunity. My phone buzzed again. A message from my legal team, another block of shares acquired. We were getting close. The board meeting is next week, Nathan said desperately. They're expecting me to present the merger details. But this unknown buyer, if they gain controlling interest, then I'll be answerable to them. To them, I repeated. Imagine that, the great Nathan Thompson having to justify his business decisions to someone else. Realization dawned slowly in his eyes. Claire the buyer. My phone buzzed again. Text from Richard Anderson. Megan's team just sent over the Horizon Tech proposal. Impressive plans. Shame about Nathan's company. They would have made a good partner if their leadership was different. I showed Nathan the text. He stared at it, and the last pieces finally clicked into place. You're going to destroy everything I've built, he whispered. No, Nathan, I said quietly. I'm going to show you what real business looks like. I stood up, smoothing the fabric of my simple, impeccably tailored dress. The board meeting is at 2 p.m. next Thursday, correct? I asked. Don't worry about preparing anything. I'll be handling the presentation. The week that followed was chaos. Sabrina showed up at my house twice, begging me to reconsider. He's family, she pleaded, as if she hadn't spent years treating me like a second-rate embarrassment. My parents tried next. Think about what this will do to the family name, my father argued, the same name that hadn't stopped them from laughing at Nathan's jokes about my cute little business. But the real satisfaction came at the board meeting. I walked into the room Nathan had ruled for years and took my place, at the head of the table. The other board members, old men who had never questioned Nathan's leadership, stared in confused silence. Gentlemen, I began as Nathan slumped in his seat. I represent Quantum Ventures, the investment firm that now holds a controlling interest in this company. I let that sink in before continuing. We've reviewed the proposed merger extensively, I said, clicking to the first slide. And we have some concerns about the current leadership strategy. For the next hour, I laid out everything. Every mistake Nathan had made. Every rushed decision. Every missed opportunity. Every time he had chosen flash over substance. The boardroom transformed. Confusion turned to concern. Concern became alarm. Therefore, I concluded, our first act as majority shareholder will be to recommend new leadership, someone who understands that real business success isn't about corner offices or country club memberships. It's about solid strategy, careful planning, and actual results. Nathan stood up, his face a shade of red I hadn't seen before. You can't do this, he said. I built this company. Did you? I asked calmly, sliding a folder across the table. Because our analysis shows that company value has actually decreased under your leadership. The only thing propping up your position was this merger, a merger that, as of this morning, is no longer happening. The board erupted in chaos. Nathan tried to speak, but his voice was drowned out by the growing chorus of angry shareholders demanding answers. I sat quietly, watching years of his carefully curated image collapse in front of him. Oh, and Nathan? I added as he staggered toward the door. His career in ruins. You might want to start looking for a new country club membership. The one you have is about to be discontinued. The aftermath was everything I had planned for. Nathan was forced to resign. His reputation in tatters. Sabrina's social circle, the one that had once mocked my simplicity, suddenly discovered that the sister they dismissed was now controlling one of the city's largest tech firms. My parents called a family meeting, probably hoping to salvage whatever was left. I went out of curiosity. You've made your point, my mother said, her voice trembling. Surely we can fix this, as a family. I looked around the table. Nathan, without his suit or swagger. Sabrina, her perfect image cracked by association. My parents, finally forced to see what had been in front of them all along. Fix what? I asked calmly. I simply did business. Isn't that what Nathan always wanted, for me to understand real business? But you've destroyed him, Sabrina cried. His career, his reputation. No, I corrected her. His arrogance destroyed him. His need to diminish others to feel important. I just showed the world what was already there. I stood up, gathering my things. The company will do better under new leadership. The shareholders will be happier. And Nathan, well, I hear there's good money in running a home-based business, if you can handle working without a proper office, that is. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. 5 years later, the company had doubled in value under new leadership. I merged it with Horizon Tech, creating one of the largest tech consultancies in the country. Nathan tried starting his own firm, but without his corporate title and family connections, he discovered that success required more than a corner office and an expensive suit. Sabrina still hosted family dinners, though they were far less grand now. Sometimes I attended, sometimes I didn't. But when I did, I would occasionally catch Nathan watching me, quietly, respectfully. The same man who once mocked my clothes, my house, and my career now sat silently, understanding in his eyes. He had finally learned what I'd always known. Real success doesn't need to announce itself. The small home office where I built my empire remained untouched. Simple. Efficient. Powerful. On the wall hung a single framed photo, a moment from that final board meeting, captured just as Nathan realized who had orchestrated his downfall. It was a masterpiece of karmic justice. 'Cause sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Measured. Planned. Earned. Kind of success they never saw coming. And as for me, I still work from home. Still drive the same reliable car. Still live in my comfortable, modest house. I mentor young women in business. I invest in startups that others overlook. I build from the ground up, just like I always have. But now, when Nathan passes me in his more modest lifestyle, no tailored suits, no chauffeur, no audience, he understands. True power isn't in what you show. It's in what you know. And I had known all along exactly what I was building.